Welcome to Organic News with Kat Waters, revealing the truths behind the conspiracy. Every Tuesday from 6 to 8 Eastern.
Okay, thank you for tuning in to this Tuesday, October 13th, 2015 on Organic News here on Awake Radio. And we have with us Kathy Kelly, who's I interviewed before. You weren't on live the last time I recorded you, Kathy, and then played it. You are the co-coordinator of Voices for Creative Nonviolence, a campaign to end U.S. military and economic warfare. During each of your 14 trips to Afghanistan since 2010, Kathy Kelly, you've lived alongside of ordinary Afghan people in a working class neighborhood in Kabul. You and other voice activists have been guests on Afghan Peace Volunteers. They share in common a common belief: where you stand determines what you see. You and your companions insist that the U.S. has not been waging a humanitarian war in Afghanistan, and that the United States should pay reparations for the suffering caused in both Afghanistan and Iraq. You also joined with activists in various regions of the country to protest drone warfare by holding demonstrations outside of U.S. military bases in Nevada, upstate New York, and most recently in Missouri. And of course, the resume goes on. But again, thank you and welcome to Organic News, Kathleen Kelly.
So thank you, Kathleen Waters. It's very good to be on your news program. Thank you.
And so, right, just before we came on, I had told you that earlier this afternoon, whose interview I'm going to play after you, I interviewed Dr. Hakeem Young, the doctor from Singapore who's been working in Afghanistan for the last 10 years and is also part of the Afghan Peace Volunteers. Do you know him? Have you met him?
Oh, surely. I consider Hakeem a mentor to many people and to me, and certainly someone who, in staying a long time, 10 years is a long time, in a setting that's very demanding, both when he lived in the rural area and lived without electricity, without running water, without even a latrine in his initial years. He's somebody who understands the harshness of life in rural areas of Afghanistan, and also the incredible beauty, the beauty of village life, the delights of children, the tenacity of the farmers working the very hard land to create potato crops. But he also understood the displacement, because he himself was kind of forced out of that village to go and live in Kabul, because there were some who took exception to the efforts he and others were making to create inter-ethnic communities at the university and also within the various residential areas of this very remote rural province. And so when they came to Kabul, by that time I and others at Voices for Creative Nonviolence already knew Hakeem and some of the young people, and we said, well, why don't you find a place to live? It would be cheaper for us, really, coming to visit and learn from you if we just bunked in with you rather than paying $50 a night for a guest house. And so it's worked out in some fashion like that. When you read in a short bio of me that I and my companions live with ordinary Afghans in a working class neighborhood, they really, in a way, they're not so ordinary. They're pretty exceptional in many ways, because they're very compassionate, striving for empathy, and in spite of having loads of good reasons to say, I want revenge, they don't. They say the opposite. They try to figure out who is needier than they are, these young people living in Kabul, surrounded by quite a lot of violence and exploitation, and they try to help other people.
So you were mentioning an article by Dr. Hakeem, and is it the one with the hashtag Enough, a campaign to end war and focus on food and health?
Well, he's written so many. I should just double check. I just sent one to you though, and that's basically the message that they've been giving out lately. They've started a campaign that I'm sure Hakeem talks about more in his interview with you, called Enough, with hashtag Enough exclamation point as the handle on Twitter. And their idea is to gather as many people as they possibly can to sign a pact, an agreement that they want to abolish war, and then also encourage one another in undertaking projects that are the opposite of war making. And, you know, instead of the works of war, to engage in works of service and care and building communities that get better at doing that all the time. And that's certainly what I've seen with the Afghan Peace Volunteers.
So you talk about, in the article that you wrote about Enough hashtag with an exclamation point, about Jamila, the mother of a little girl, Fatima, who comes to the street kids school, and the school is designed to help children working on the streets to go to school. An estimated 60,000 Afghan children work in the streets of Kabul to supplement their families' incomes.
Yeah, you know, there's so many families that didn't want to leave where they live. Like, you know, now people are pouring out of the Kunduz province after fighting there, and the hospital has been bombed by a U.S. airstrike, and people are frightened. They don't know where to turn for protection. So they come to big cities like Kabul, and Kabul can't handle all of these refugees arriving, and there's not enough water, there's no fuel, there aren't anything like houses. People are living in mud brick homes if they're lucky. Otherwise, they're under tarps with poles, and they don't have bread. So the Afghan Peace Volunteers, after they'd spent a sleepless night, 10 hours of a gun battle that they were very frightened by because there were explosions and gunshots, then they got up and thought, well, maybe we should leave, go to our families in Bamyan or try to get out of Kabul. But they were also learning about the people running to Kabul from Kunduz, and so they decided that they would try to find a way to get bread and some supplies to at least 5 families that day. And they set about doing that. And they've also been of great help to little Fatima, little Fatima, and her mother, Jamila, because actually some very corrupt healthcare people had diagnosed Fatima to have typhoid meningitis, which was true, but she was cured of it, and they kept prescribing, or some corrupt doctors kept prescribing very strong antibiotics that she was to take 2 times a day, and they were expensive as well. And so her mother was facing an overwhelming debt. She can never, ever imagine being able to pay this debt. And she has other children besides Fatima. And how will she survive the winter? She can't even acquire bread for the family.
In this article that you wrote, it says that she developed a fever, Fatima, and all 4 of her limbs became paralyzed.
Yes, she was very, very sick, and so her mother had taken her from one hospital to another, and finally, at a 4th hospital, doctors said, your daughter will die within 10 minutes if she's not hospitalized immediately. So they put little Fatima in the hospital. She was about 9 years old at the time, or maybe 9 and a half, and she did have typhoid meningitis. She did desperately need help. But you see, after they had to discharge her because the mother couldn't any longer pay to keep this child in the hospital, they said, well, then you're going to have to give her these antibiotics. And they kept prescribing them for over 1.5 years, and these were such strong antibiotics, they really almost could have killed her, I think. And so Hakeem, who is a medical doctor, learned about the case because some of the Afghan Peace Volunteers had visited Jamila and Fatima in their home. They were looking to recruit people to come to this street kids school, and in exchange for coming to the school, the kids get a big container of oil and a big sack of rice so that their mother can feed the family. And that's how they met Jamila. And she told them about Fatima, and they told Hakim about Fatima. And then he said, well, she needs a lab test. We can arrange for that at a local hospital. So one of the older Afghan Peace Volunteers accompanied Fatima to a lab, and the Afghan Peace Volunteers paid for the test. And it turns out she's okay. It was a stool sample that was taken, and she doesn't need those antibiotics anymore. So what she needs is healthy food. But that's a problem, isn't it? Because the mom can only afford flour for bread and occasional beans or maybe, very occasionally, a vegetable. But Fatima needs nourishing food every day.
Do they know how she got this thyroid meningitis?
I'm sorry, I don't think anybody's very sure of that, but the health conditions are very bad in these refugee camps. Jamila came as a refugee from Pule Khubri, which is in that Kunduz province, and she herself, the mom, had been sold into a family, which often happens with young daughters, at the age of 7, and then she worked in the family into which she was to marry, doing sewing, but she was never able to save up any money for herself. And then when she married the man that she was kind of arranged to marry, she was 13 years old, and she began to have children, and the only way she could feed her family was to marry her oldest daughter into another family in exchange for some money, and it really wasn't enough to adequately feed the family. And so she tries to wash clothes for a living, but times are tight everywhere, and the family isn't always able to pay her that she washes clothes for. So she's in a very difficult situation.
Oops. I don't know what happened there, but we lost Kathy. Let me get her back. Maybe she hit the button by accident. Okay, here we go.
Hello?
Hi, Kathy.
Hi. Sorry about that. I think we got cut off.
Yep, I think we did. So again, in this article that you wrote, it says that the debt that they accrued was 140,000 Afghanis, about 2,300 US dollars, which isn't really that much. I mean, if that was in the US, that would be like 23,000 or 200.
Well, Jamila is very likely living either very close to or beneath the poverty line, which I believe in Afghanistan would be $2 a day. So imagine if she is able to bring in $2 every day to feed her family and pay some kind of rent. How would she ever come up with that 2,000 plus sum?
I was going to say, I mean, that would have been nothing over here in the States for people to kind of raise that money for that. If there was a way that they knew about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there really is a great deal of compassion and empathy, I think, present within the U.S. people. But just what you're saying points to a big problem that people don't know. I sometimes think about it as literacy. It's very important to learn how to read and write. But Paul Chappelle points out, he's a very good analyst, that what we need is a literacy about the stories of people who bear the consequences of wars. And, I think a lot of people in the United States might have thought, oh, is that war still going on? And, we right now are in a country that's going to spend, it seems in 2015, $35 billion to maintain 9,800 soldiers. In 2014, Yahoo News said that the United States was spending $2.1 million per soldier in Afghanistan. And then you have Jamila not able to get health care or clean water
Right.
or beans for her family, and also under a concussion death.
So I wanted to talk about the Doctors Without Borders bombing the hospital. Sorry, the hospital of the Doctors Without Borders in Kunduz, and you were in Afghanistan, but not when that happened, were you?
No, I had already returned. But the first time I ever went to Afghanistan, it was as a guest of a very similar hospital, the Emergency Surgical Center for Victims of War in Kabul. In fact, some of the patients from Kunduz were brought to that Emergency Surgical Center in Kabul, and that's a very arduous, difficult journey, I'm sure, over roads that aren't always even paved, and it must have been terrifying for people to, see other patients incinerated and to survive the blazes and the walls becoming rubble. And, every 15 minutes another bomb was fired at the hospital, precisely the hospital building in a compound the size of a football field. It was a very deliberate attack, and it seems that the United States knew, the authorities had the coordinates of this distinguished group's hospital a week in advance of the attack, and then the very initial minutes of the bombing at 2:05 on October 3rd, 2:05 a.m., a missile hit the hospital, and the authorities in the hospital called NATO, and they called the United States military, and they called the Afghan military, and they said, "You're bombing a hospital, you're bombing us." And every 15 minutes until 3:15 a.m., another explosive was fired at the patients in that hospital.
And why do you think that is? Why would they blow up knowing it's a hospital?
We don't have
I mean, were they trying to pretend that it was like someone else and create like some false flag or something? I mean,
the United States military gave 3 different reasons within maybe the first 2 days following this terrible attack. At first they said, well, our on-the-ground troops were being fired at by Taliban fighters inside the hospital. And then the people inside the hospital said, no, there was no fighting going on, none whatsoever. So then they said that they had to fire at the hospital because the Afghan army asked them to do so. And so they kind of tried to blame it on the Afghan army. But really, the Afghan army, according to all the rules that have been set up, the Afghan Air Force, is subordinate to the United States Air Force. The way they have it set up, the Afghan Air Force is not able to act unless it gets directives from the U.S. Air Force. So it's pretty clear the Taliban didn't fire those missiles. The United States has acknowledged that they did attack the hospital. And so that should be subjected to a very transparent, international, independent investigation, not one that's done by the U.S. military. And I hope people will continue to press for this. The International Commission of the Red Cross and several UN agencies and Amnesty International and this hospital I mentioned, the Emergency Surgical Center, have all kind of circled round, the wagons have circled round, if you will, and said, no, you cannot just try to hope this will fall out of the news. We're going to keep bringing it up. We're going to keep insisting that you tell us what were the recorded conversations that went on as the strikes were ordered. What were they doing? Why were they doing this? Who decided this? And I think that transparency and truth is one of the only ways to stop this kind of attack from happening again. In July of 2015, last summer, July 19th, U.S. forces attacked an Afghan military base. It was a kind of a forwarding base. A group of soldiers were kind of huddled around their campfire, more or less, And the United States attacked them and killed 10 soldiers and injured 7 others. And of course, the Afghan military and the Afghan government said, you've got to tell us why you did this. We want an investigation. Well, the U.S. said, yes, it's under investigation. We're really sorry that happened. But, we've been keeping a list since 2011 that we call the Afghan Atrocities List. And these kinds of atrocities happen again and again. A missile is fired at children collecting fuel on a mountainside. A missile is fired at women who are out trying to get clean water for their family. A missile is fired at people who had just gone to a tanker, an oil tanker that was stuck in something like quicksand almost, and it sunk. And they realized, well, we can get free fuel. And so they clustered all around it. About 90 people had gathered. And the United States was called in by German authorities who were nearby, and they fired missiles and killed, some say as many as 90 people that day.
Whose job is it to hold the U.S. to account?
Yours and mine.
Right. That's a good answer. And so, like, for any of these atrocities that you just mentioned, no one was ever held.
Well, it's interesting, Catherine. In Germany, it was major news day after day after day for weeks, until finally the German public had so rallied in terms of holding someone accountable that the Minister of Defense had to leave his post. And another general was also removed. Now, I don't think that's the answer, moving people and switching chairs around the table and whatnot.
In the United States, in the U.S., you mean? The minister of...
No, this was in Germany. Oh. Because that one instance that I told you about where the tanker had gotten stuck in the mire, in the mud,
right,
in the muck, there was a German base. This was a NATO base staffed by German military nearby. And so a German commander called the Americans and said, could you, we see this big crowd of people and they might threaten our safety, so could you just start killing them? And when the German population heard this, because the German media covered it, right, and they covered it every day, they wouldn't let that story go. So the population in Germany, the ordinary people said, well, we don't want to be that kind of a country, this is terrible. But here in the United States, we don't hear about it, or
right,
if we do, it's just one day. And so that's why a lot of people that I know have been going in front of local hospitals, some of them wearing bathrobes, to say, if you bomb this place, it's a war crime.
Right.
The same is true in Afghanistan. And I think that's a good idea. People out in Long Island did it recently. We did it here in Chicago. I was with people on a walk from Syracuse to Niagara. I had to leave the walk early, but they're doing that same action in Buffalo, and they just did it in Syracuse the first day of the walk. And people in several locations in the United Kingdom have taken that action. It happened in Washington, D.C. And I think it's a good, simple, clear act. You just get a group of friends together, say, bring a bathrobe if you can, make your signs that say, don't bomb hospitals, or bombing hospitals is a war crime. I think all of war is a crime. It never, ever should begin or be sustained. The weapons profiteers are all acting criminally, and it's very, very wrong-headed. But this is one instance that people can understand without needing to say, well, I'm not sure, maybe those people shouldn't have been in that hospital, or, maybe the people that went to the hospital deserve to be killed. No, people aren't going to say that. In fact, 3 children were killed that day. And the week before, the hospital was destroyed, and it's totally useless now. The week before, that hospital had treated 359 patients, 59 of whom were children.
They did do something here in New York yesterday up at, I'm sorry, was it Presbyterian, New York Presbyterian Hospital on 168th and Broadway. Again, it was a small group of perhaps 20, 25 people.
Well, that's very good. And I mean, it happened out in Long Island as well. and this is on short notice, and without much more than people trading press releases kind of horizontally, saying, "Oh, we wrote a flyer, we wrote a press release here. Let's do this."
Yeah, it was pretty silent vigil. I mean, they weren't chanting or really saying anything, just holding signs. And I interviewed 3 of the ladies who were part of like this peace group from Washington Heights up there. So at least people, they're doing something, and they were handing out flyers. People were taking the flyers. But I did want to just kind of make this sort of point that I also was making it with Dr. Hakim. Like when we use the word war, I'm I'm just gonna from now on call it like war crimes, because it's not a legitimate war.
I don't think there is such a thing as a legitimate war. We're talking about a world wherein people have weapons that are designed to attack civilians. And 90% of the casualties in wars today are civilian. And I think the idea that people should solve problems by maiming and killing one another is a hideous idea. There's no such thing as a good war. There's no flag large enough to cover the shame of killing innocent people.
Right.
And all these wars are fought because of small elites in nation states that somehow think they have a right, an automatic God-given right, to consume a bigger portion of the pie, to hog more than their fair share. And so the other people aren't going to just let them do it. So they say, well, if you don't go along with what we demand, we'll eliminate you.
Yeah. I mean, it's getting ridiculously, out of control. I mean, how much more do these corporations, want? I mean, they're trying to get that TPP passed and make it so corporations have the right to sue governments that try to regulate them in any way and interfere with their future profits. So that would be like saying that, right? So peace activists, where would be like the criminals, like you would be the criminal or anybody like you for interfering with Lockheed Martin, future profits of blowing up innocent civilians.
Well, I think it's a good idea to encourage our young friends, especially at university campuses, for instance, to investigate to what extent is Lockheed Martin maybe paying for research that enables them to develop more weapon systems, or is Lockheed Martin kind of buying off some of the administrators so that they won't want professors raising issues about war and peace? And it's astounding to me how present Lockheed Martin is, for instance, in Binghamton, which is one of the flagship schools in the New York university system. Lockheed Martin is a big corporate investor in that university, and some really brave students are starting to take Lockheed Martin on and say, we're not real happy about studying at a school where a major funder and sometimes the controlling interest is a weapon-making company.
So that's really a good thing. I mean, see, that's what needs to happen, like more and more. And how did this?
Well, I agree. I think you're absolutely right. And I just need to say to a friend who's come in that I'm on a video interview right now. Thank you. Okay, we're good, Catherine. Thank you.
Sure. So can we talk about the Red Cross and Oxfam?
Well, sure. I think there are some non-governmental organizations that have a track record which is not only admirable, but has managed to kind of stay above the high levels of corruption that have afflicted many other non-governmental organizations. And Oxfam is one of them. I think, people, when they contribute to Oxfam, they may be paying salaries for large numbers of people, and those salaries will be a lot higher than people working on the ground in an impoverished country. But generally, people see Oxfam as a group that has promoted the idea of bread for the world. And then we could step from there to say bread not bombs. And I think the International Commission of the Red Cross has also been a very, very needed and respected organization. But now, if you don't mind me mentioning, there's USAID, United States Aid for International Development. And I was myself very surprised to realize that in Afghanistan, in just this year, the first 6 months of 2015, USAID told the United States that it was supporting 618 healthcare facilities in Afghanistan. And so there's an organization whose job it is to be kind of a watchdog. It's called the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. And the person at the head of it is a man named John Sacco. And he's relentless in researching all the various listings that different non-governmental organizations submit, especially if they're using government money that supposedly are going to be helping people reconstruct in Afghanistan. So anyway, his crew used, like Google Earth, geospatial imaging they call it, to look at all the coordinates for these supposed 618 healthcare facilities. Well, it turned out 6 of them were located in Pakistan, not in Afghanistan at all. Another 6 were located in Tajikistan, which is a country north of Afghanistan, and 1 was located in the Mediterranean Sea. And then they found that of these ones that were listed, another 189 of the coordinates were X's on a spot where there wasn't even a building within 400 yards of the place where the healthcare facility was supposed to be. And in half of that number, there wasn't anything within a half mile. So do you see what I'm saying? That these places didn't even exist.
Right, so they're saying that they had healthcare facilities where there wasn't anything, not even a building.
So sometimes people talk about ghost hospitals that the U.S. is supposedly funding.
Oh my God.
And then you have the hospital in Kunduz run by Doctors Without Borders, and it's treating 359 people in 1 week. They've been up and running for years. The people working it are risking their lives to be there.
Yeah.
These are some of the bravest people you could ever imagine.
Exactly.
And the United States bombs that hospital, and now it is a ghost hospital, isn't it?
Unbelievable, boy. Unbelievable. I mean, people should not rest until people are jailed. I mean, if that's all they think they can get away with is like an apology, I mean...
Oh, no, Catherine, I wanted to differ. I don't think anyone should go to jail. I've gone to prison for trying to bring a letter to a military base or about drone warfare. So I was in prison the first 3 months of this year. And I don't think prisons are the answer. I don't want to punish people, but I do want to rehabilitate. And I think, as long as our resources are being poured into the Pentagon, and the Pentagon is going to keep spending, and asking for more and more and more, we're not going to be able to solve problems within the United States or really help anybody beyond. And I think at this point, the United States, as a country, with its military, with its State Department, is no longer able to control the terrible violence and mayhem that's been unleashed by our wars. Yeah. I don't think the United States, no matter how... I mean, look at the Taliban are, wearing sandals, and they throw a blanket over their shoulders and carry machine guns, but they're not a well-funded or well-trained or well-equipped group. And for 14 years, they've been able to control more than half of the provinces all across Afghanistan. The United States has not been able to say, we have vanquished the Taliban, not by any means. I mean, they've now got major roadways under their control. They've got cities and districts under their control. So why is the United States spending billions and trillions of dollars on the military in Afghanistan and in Iraq? We haven't solved problems. We haven't saved people. We haven't made life better. And we need our resources to deal with global warming, with climate change, with our pollution, and with our need to convert away from fossil fuels into using renewables. Now, every single Air National Guard base, for instance, could be turned into a base that's not flying drones, or weaponized drones over other countries, but instead a place where people are converting to renewable energies. Like, I think about this base that my friends are walking toward now up in the Niagara area, the Niagara Falls area. Well, that could be used to create hydroelectric power. And there are studies that have shown that every single person working at the base could remain employed,
right,
but doing good things, needed
right,
things.
Right. I know all the energy and money that gets spent doing so much destruction can just be turned around and put towards good. And I know I just don't understand even corporations that like this term profit. Like I just believe in calling things what it is, and this like I hear people when they talk about all of these things, like they'll talk about like the a few rich people are benefiting, and I think to myself, I mean, are they really? I mean, are they really benefiting? I mean, destroying the planet. They're either like just addicted to war, like Dr. Hakim had said, the U.S. is like addicted to war. I mean, people are addicted to war, so that's not really benefiting people. And right, having peace is a real benefit. Having a healthy environment and clean water and food, and that's real benefit and real profit. I just feel like it's important to distinguish the two,
And we could be beloved all around the world if we were really extending a hand of friendship and not, creating pretend projects or allowing some people to make enormous amounts of money, either because they're working on a project that basically serves themselves, but not necessarily other people.
Right.
There was a hospital in a place called Garges. It's near the Pakistani border in Afghanistan. And it's a state-of-the-art hospital that was constructed. You see the pictures and you think, wow, that was really well done. But people were told the second year that the hospital was being built, there's not enough fuel in this entire province to supply that hospital. It's going to be useless.
Yeah.
And the people building it just went right on building. The photo ops, were all happening. The donors were pleased because here's this nice hospital we built, and they could tell other people about the nice hospital they built. Well, no one can use it. And so who benefited? Well, some people who probably were pretty comfortable already.
Right. Exactly. Last week, Anthony Lowenstein and his book Disaster Capitalism, Making a Killing Out of Catastrophe, he spoke twice here in the city, once at the New School, and then the second time was last Thursday with Jeremy Scahill at this Housing Works. And, he talked about, the aid and the money that's supposed to be going, to the people in need that doesn't reach the people in need.
Mm-hmm. I think there really are possibilities for communities to link together and say, this isn't acceptable. We don't want to live this way. We don't have to live this way. We can say we are going to demand a change. And I think with the Occupy project, we started to see a lot of that kind of linkage happening. People were going to places where others were being foreclosed out of their homes, or they were going to places where mental health clinics weren't adequately serving people. And then it became difficult, I know, to maintain that project. But in a very short length of time, they had pretty well globalized the logo 99 and 1, the 1% being people who are just unbelievably wealthy. I mean, they control so much of the wealth and the finances in countries all around the world, while others have to, try to get by, and there are so many people who just aren't getting by. So it's my hope that a lot of people who are in more comfortable places, people with tenured positions at universities, could start, really practicing solidarity with people who are trying hard to work towards social change. I think about the Catholic worker movement in New York and these houses of hospitality, and they always need more help to, come and cook meals or clean the houses and make them pleasant places for people to come who have no place else to go. And I think about a lot of the people who have positions within, faith-based groups, positions within community councils, or sometimes even neighborhood block clubs. And we all have chances, ways that we can express our solidarity further. And that's why I'm so happy to bring back words from Afghanistan about how a very idealistic group of young people, certainly motivated by Hakim, are trying their darndest to extend a hand of friendship to people that are needier than they are. And so they help the women to get wool and blanket materials and make very, very heavy, warm blankets. And 3,000 of those were distributed last winter and the winter before, free of charge, to very needy families in Afghanistan. And people in the United States collected $40,000 to pay for that project. And I'm so grateful to the many, many people who opened up their hearts and their wallets to help that happen. And then they're also, as I say, running the school for the kids who are child laborers so they can become literate, because that's so important. As children become literate, they might have a much different possibility in their lives to escape being, part of human trafficking or part of terrible gangs when they start out as laborers on the streets. And so now, 100 families are involved in the Street Kids Project, and once a month they get the big sack of rice and the cooking oil. Well, that's a $50,000 project. And Voices is a little organization. I'm sitting here in the second floor of a 2-flat apartment that we rent, and, we have 4 computers and a kitchen and a bathroom and a couple of bedrooms, and that's it. But we are so fortunate to be able to link up with our young friends in Afghanistan.
I asked Dr. Hakim, if he's able to organize, a couple of the peace activists, the Afghan Peace Volunteers, to do an interview. He would translate, and even if it was just a quick message that each of them wanted to say, we would try to to work that out.
Well, especially in the winter months, Catherine, it's so cold in Afghanistan, they can't even keep schools open, because how would they heat the schools? And the children would be freezing in these rooms with their coats on. And so they close the schools once the weather gets really, really cold. And so during that time, our young friends will come over to the place called the Border Free Center, and they'll be wearing 5 layers of clothing, I know, and it won't be warm, but they'll warm it up with their energies. And that would be, I'm sure, very welcome for them to have a chance to be talking with you on a radio program.
And so what are your plans? What are you working on anything, or what's do you have a next trip, any place you're going to?
Well, yes, I will go back over to Afghanistan at the end of November. And prior to that, I'll be going out to quite a few different cities in the United States. And I'm always happy to do that. There are different places that have invited me to come and talk about the Afghan Peace Volunteers. I'll also be wanting to join with people who are having outdoor public presences at hospitals, and we're trying to organize those in a few other spots. I also hope that at some point Voices can amplify the voices of a couple of people whom we've known from Iraq over a long period of time, who have very recently had to flee and go along that route that we've all been reading about from Turkey to Lesbos Island, and then into Hungary, and then on up to Germany, and eventually Finland, in the case that I'm following most closely. And so there's a lot of writing and researching and learning to be done, but it's also so important to be out on the streets. And so we have a regular vigil here in Chicago every Thursday afternoon as part of the Witness Against Torture, and beginning on the 15th, some people are going to be part of a fast, because Shafar Amr was scheduled to be released from Guantanamo after he's been held without charge and tortured badly for well over 13 years. It looks like finally, Britain's been saying for years, send him back, we want him back. He's a British national. And something is slowing it down, so a number of people will be fasting, and you could be in touch with the Witness Against Torture campaign to learn more about that.
Sure. Witness Against Torture, those guys are awesome.
Yeah.
That organization. Did you have anything to say about the bombing in Turkey recently?
I feel so sad to think of people campaigning for peace in the sense of let's talk to one another, let's come together.
Oh, yeah.
Then realizing that that's not a safe thing to do in Turkey today with the double bombings. My heart goes out to every family whose arms will be aching for loved ones that will never return. It's a terrible, terrible shame. And these kinds of, offshoots of civil wars and battling, I think, can be expected when nations all around the world keep pouring their largesse into armed struggles and buying more weapons and wanting to have the upper hand because of weapons, because of having guns, because of having bullets, and because of having people who will be so filled with resentment and antagonism, they'll loan their lives to become weapons. We could live differently, though. I think we've got to stop the weapons trade.
Right. Just lastly, in the article that you wrote, it says since 2004, and you're talking about Dr. Hakim, when he first began working in Afghanistan, he discovered that the country's healthcare system is riddled by pervasively corrupt practices. Lack of oversight of Afghan's medical system allowed corrupt doctors and pharmacists to overprescribe, you were talking about that before, overprescribing. On to add to the problems that are going on.
Well, I think that when people begin to prosper, obviously their health gets better because they're able to get nutritious foods and clean water, and maybe not have to work so many long, hard hours. And so I really wish that for everybody in Afghanistan. And, many times the ways in which organizations approach trying to improve health care for other people perhaps don't start at the most very basic levels of providing nutrition and overcoming hunger. Right now, in Afghanistan, 500,000 children are suffering from severe, acute malnourishment, and that affects the children's brains. They acquire brain deficiencies. And it would cost 5 cents to get iodized salt into the diet of a child who is suffering from severe acute malnourishment that might help the child overcome a brain deficiency. 5 cents per child per year. Now that's something I think people would really want to contribute toward. But, instead in 2014, we're spending $2.1 million per soldier per year. That's not justice. And we'll never see peace if that's the way our resources are directed. So I think to build empathy, to listen to the stories of people who can't escape our war zones, to know that the young Afghan Peace Volunteers constantly say, blood doesn't wash away blood. And they're looking for peace in their context in spite of being vulnerable every single day to attacks and displacement and hunger. So I think we have a lot to learn. Sometimes we have to be more humble. I know I have to be more humble and really try to listen and learn from other people in other parts of the world who want their children to prosper as much as we want ours to prosper.
You seem pretty humble to me, Kathy.
Whoa! There's always more to learn. And of course, the Global Days of Listening phone call on the 21st of every month is a good opportunity. The kids in Afghanistan talk with people from war zones in Russia. They talk with people from El Salvador, from Colombia, from Germany, from Australia. It's really pretty fascinating.
And what is that called?
Well, on the 21st of every month, there's a Skype phone call with the Afghan Peace Volunteers and friends of theirs all around the world. So you just go to globaldaysoflistening.com and you'll figure out how you can either be on the call as a participant or listen in. And then another thing that I think is very wonderful, and Hakeem maybe talks about it, but the Enough campaign. Our young friends saying they've had enough of war, and that's reachable by going to enough.ourjourneytosmile.com.
Ourjourneytosmile.com. Thank you.
And there you can find 200 short 3-minute videos at the ourjourneytosmile.com website that tell about the lives of ordinary Afghans, especially the children. And then at the Enough side, you can sign that pact that says we want to abolish war.
I'm gonna go to those sites and share them as soon as
wonderful.
As soon as the show is over. Probably while I'm playing the recorded interview with Dr. Hakeem in the next hour.
Oh, he'll be very pleased. It's several of the young friends there.
Kathy Kelly of Creative Voices for Nonviolence.
That's Voices for Creative Nonviolence. And thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much for your encouragement and for calling, and we'll look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you, Kathy.